What is up, everyone? Welcome back. We're talking about the what if scenarios yet again. Another week. We're circling back to the SEC. I know I was thinking about doing the Big 12 this week, but after the SEC had some chaos over the weekend, Texas A&M taking an L to a non-contender team, I wanted to circle back because I saw something that was crazy. I have created the craziest scenario. We have ourselves an 8-way tie due to the fact that the SEC is a very large conference and they only play 8 games in conference. We get crazy scenarios like this where at the end of the season we have 8 teams tied for first place. Tied for first place, 8 teams. And so here's what the 8 teams would look like. We have 6-2 for the first 8, and then I originally wanted to try to get Vanderbilt to get the 9th team, but Vanderbilt's schedule is a little wonky. They play too many of the same opponents as everyone else, and they already have a couple of losses under their belt. But as you can see, Texas A&M, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Missouri, LSU, and Ole Miss all tied for first place, and Mississippi State's on track for 0-8. Everyone else is pretty much on track. There's not very many games left where none of these teams play this other team, so a lot of them just kind of lose out. So, except for South Carolina, I think they play Vanderbilt, and I think I have South Carolina beaten Vanderbilt, which in this scenario I have them. Also, in this scenario, Texas needs to lose to either Arkansas or Florida, but Arkansas is the more realistic choice for the upset because Florida has way too many injuries this year to really make them a competitive team against Texas. And so I have Arkansas beating Texas in the upset to give them that second loss. And we get to see on what the SEC says about this many teams tied. So when it comes to the SEC, here's the list of criteria for 3 or more tied programs. Generally, this is a lot easier when you only have less teams and when you're only competing for second place versus competing for all the way for first and second. So you have your head-to-head competition among the tied teams. We're going to go over that one first, and I'll show you the craziness and how hard it will be to actually articulate the correct answer with the head-to-heads. Record versus all common conference opponents among the tied teams. That's going to be in the same graphic because it all matters. Record against the highest, best placed common conference opponents and conference standings and proceedings through the conference standings among tied teams. 3 is a lot more challenging to do because now you have to go and see who's the highest place, but then you're tied with 8 teams at 6th place, so who's actually higher in that regard? So what we're actually going to do is we're going to skip 3 because that one's almost impossible to do with 8 tied teams. We're going to show you the cumulative conference winning percentage of all conference opponents among the tied teams to show you their kind of like their conference strength almost of like which teams actually played good teams and which teams just played bad SEC teams. And then, of course, you have your random draw and then your total scoring margins versus all conference opponents. If you're already getting through all these steps, if you're at 5, then you're just going to be marking up scores. Okay, so now we're here at the graph. As you can see, this is a mess. It's really hard to read and really hard to follow. That's why I color-coded it, and even after color-coding it, it still doesn't make a whole lot of sense on what's going on. This is to show you criteria 1 and criteria 2 of the previous requirements. What are your matchups of head-to-heads? That's why you have your overhead. You have Georgia beating Tennessee, Tennessee beating Vanderbilt, Vanderbilt beating Alabama, etc. Then you have your victories over common opponents, which is why we have Kentucky, Arkansas, and South Carolina, because there's 3 of the main priority 6 have lost to these 3 teams. So now we're seeing what their records are against these common opponents, and then Vanderbilt also is on this list as well. And as you can see, there's just too much overlap, too much craziness. So it's like if we were to go by Vanderbilt standards, Vanderbilt beat Alabama, right? But then every other team, Texas, LSU, and Tennessee all beat Vanderbilt. So does that make them better than Alabama? Even though Alabama has the head-to-head matchup against Georgia, Tennessee also has the head-to-head against Alabama, but then Alabama has head-to-head against LSU, but LSU beat Vanderbilt. What is the criteria? And we can see that for a lot of them, even South Carolina as well as Kentucky. So we can't use the first 2 criteria because it's just too complicated, and you'll be essentially hurting people's feelings when you were to just kind of like judge it based off of this criteria. So what we're going to have to do is judge it based on winning percentages of these teams with conference opponents. So we're going to look at all their conference opponents and what their win record was at the very end of the season. And as I said earlier, winning record percentage of every team that's not listed on here will be pretty easy because if you look at all the remaining games of these teams, they play one of the 6 teams, not much other overlap, so it was really easy to determine on what the outcomes of these games were if we made all these teams win out, essentially. So here are the winning percentage of all the teams, and as you can see, Texas and Tennessee tie for the worst quote-unquote record of the group as in they have their opponents were worse than every other opponent. Alabama came out in first with 52%, and it kind of just falls in between everybody else. So if we're to use this metric, we'll get to a point where it's essentially Alabama and LSU in the championship game. I'm going to show you the records of like their overall records other than just conference record, because right now they're tied 6-2. But if you looked at their overall record, it'd be very interesting to show you that using the overall record in conference standings, I still believe, even though this next showing will show you that it's kind of rigged a little bit, but I will continue to say that your conference matchups and your record conference matter to the conference championship. But if you want to go to the 12-team playoff or that in the national title game, etc., then your overall should be taken into account as a unit versus like in conference. It should only matter about your conference play. So here's their overall record coming to finish, and then we put them in order. Texas and Tennessee are tied essentially at 10-2 with their records here. Alabama won at 10-2. We have LSU at 9-3, Texas A&M at 9-3. Those two teams have the better conference record and better conference opponents compared to like Georgia, Missouri, and Ole Miss, especially Tennessee and Texas with a lackluster performance. Alabama and LSU's both conference opponents is 50% or higher, so essentially above 500, which is really crazy because if you've watched any of my videos before and we do these tiebreakers, none of the other teams have ever breached 50%. So essentially this is the conference championship. It would be Alabama versus LSU. Alabama with the higher record, essentially the home team. And this will be the SEC championship, and there will be a chance for a 10-3, say like let's say LSU were a 10-3 team to make it to the 12-team playoff because they'll get that guaranteed bid. And would that make Alabama out because they were 10-3 to finish the league, or would it also still be able to put them in the 12-team because their overall record and their conference record was the best in the SEC prior to this championship game? But who knows? The committee will have to figure that one out, and that would be like 6 other 10-2 teams in the SEC. Would they also get in? Would they bubble? Who knows? But that's going to be it for this video. Please like and subscribe if you want more videos like this. Next video will be the Big 12 because that one is even crazier, especially after we see the 12-team playoff rankings. We'll be able to like determine on what they value at the ACC and the Big 12. So please tune in for those. Peace.